All right. We are back. Hockey Talk Tuesday has returned. It was so popular in week one that we're bringing it back for one more week and maybe more weeks to come. Welcome in, everybody. Isaac Petcash, Ryan Zapolsky. It's Hockey Talk Tuesday, episode number 2. And Ryan, I honestly, we joked at the beginning of this when we talked about potentially doing these episodes. It's like, oh, it's so early in the season. What are we going to talk about? And it's already chaos.
It is, yeah. Local hockey, Penn, Sabres, everything is kind of, I think, almost as expected, though, both sides. I mean, you never know what you're going to get with the Penguins these days. Sabres as well, kind of up and down, but it's been exciting, I think, and Otters as well. I mean, they've had some really exciting close games already, so it's been a good start of the season.
So, it's been interesting because, we've had so much uncertainty, I think, with the Penguins and the Sabres. We're going to get into that in a little bit here. And by the way, we're streaming live again tonight on YouTube, on Twitch, on X, and on Facebook. You might see our platforms a little different. Just tried a couple other things out. So let us know in the comments what you feel, if you like the feel of this, if you think it's too simple, if you think it's too complex, let us know. We'd love to get your feedback as we're trying out some new things here on the Gem City Sports Podcast Network. We're going to get to the Pens and Sabres in a second, Ryan. They play tomorrow. And we're going to talk the Otters as well. But it just seems like this year is such a make or break year for so many of the teams that we follow, right? Whether it's Erie, whether it's, maybe even Mercyhurst men's and women's hockey, and the same for the Pens and Sabres. And to me, like, I look at this, I just think there's a little bit of timidness, if you will, from teams early on that, yeah, you want to get out of the gate strong, but there's also that concern that if you over pursue early on, you could lose games. And as we know, when you lose games early in the season, that could be your season.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you want to have the best start you possibly can. Any league you play in, you put yourself behind early on. It's really tough to come back. You're fighting your way uphill all year trying to get back in the standings. But I feel that way. Yeah, for sure, from the Sabres and the Penguins. Maybe more so the Sabres. Pittsburgh's been kind of high flying a little bit offensively and giving up a lot of goals defensively as well. So they're maybe not as conservative right now as Buffalo has been. But yeah, even on the local side as well, the Otters, I think they've done a really good job. I think carrying momentum at times and then stopping momentum too when it comes back the other way. And that's what hockey's about. I mean, it's a game of momentum. The teams that are successful are the ones that can carry the momentum for the longest and are able to shut down a team's attack as quick as possible. So I think you've seen that from all teams so far this year.
And we're going to start with the Erie Otters on this, Ryan, because if you want to talk about roller coaster rides, it's funny because I'm downstairs in my basement, and my son Bennett, we built a little roller coaster for him a couple of days ago, and I almost felt like bringing it out just so we could depict exactly what the season has been. What a weekend for the Otters, and I feel like what we talked about last week on the pod is what we're going to talk about this week, the ups and downs and the ebbs and flows of this team. 2-0 lead last Friday at home against North Bay. That lead gets blown. It's a 3-2 loss and shootout, goal given up with 5 seconds to go in the game. Otters pick up a point, and they end up losing the game. Then you go and play Windsor the next night, down 3-1 going into the third period, and you reel off 5 straight goals. What was this weekend like, I guess, just from a coaching perspective, whether it's from your perspective, Stan's perspective, just in terms of what you thought went right, what went wrong, and why the two games happened the way they did, because they were just so opposite from each other?
Yeah, I think both nights kind of opposite. Yeah, exactly like you said, opposite of each other. I think the first night, the Otters really carried play for the first period, and maybe the first 5 minutes of the second period. But it's all about when you let a team stick around for long enough, eventually bad things are going to happen. We just didn't step on their throat on Friday night. Let a good team hang around for too long. They got some really good goaltending too towards the end, as did we. But I think that's what happened on Friday night. And then it was almost reversed on Saturday. Maybe we come out a little bit flat because of the deflating loss on Friday night. Windsor really carried the play the first 15 minutes, probably that first period. I think the shots on goal at one point were 13-2. I think by the end of the first period, it was even, though, just because of, we woke up after their second goal, got back into the game, and then just a slower second period, I think, overall. But the back half of the game, we certainly controlled it. And, being persistent and kind of sticking with it is one thing that's a message that you want to always give these guys. And we did that for sure on Saturday night. We stuck with the game plan, able to finally break through, get that third goal, the fourth goal quickly after that. And then we locked it down. That was one thing that I think maybe the first 4 games of the season, playing with the lead late in games, especially at home, I think the first 2 home games, we just weren't able to kind of lock it down. I think after we got that lead on Friday night and Saturday night. We were able to finally do that and get a huge win at home. That's a big win against a really good team.
I think you make an interesting point because just from my point of view, and I think a lot of fans that watched the team early on, the concern has been with the team really similar to what was the case last year when you and I talked during the playoffs, right? It was you
Yeah.
can't put a complete 60-minute effort yet together, but you just hope that the best half of your game or the best 2/3 of your game are the second and third periods, which was the case on Saturday. I think the North Bay game to me just early on is indicative of kind of how what the team can be, but then also the highs and lows of the Otters. And I think what we're starting to see, I don't know what your perspective is on this, Ryan, but I think what you're seeing with Erie right now is a team that has a very high ceiling and also potentially a very low floor. And I think that this is something that you're seeing with some of the scoring. We're going to get to Wes Royston in a second. He had 3 goals on the weekend. He's been a huge contributor and a player in the first few games, but uh, where do you stand on that? I mean, the way I view it is that this team has the ability to be the highest of highs, and of course, you guys have been able to put up some goals, but also to have those lapses. Is it just trying to get the new guys involved? Is it just an early season jitter thing? What would you attribute this to, Ryan? Because we talked last year, it was we thought just kind of the inability to roll 4 lines, and then you become tired, and then you have lapses. Is it attributed to anything this year, or just what would you say from that perspective, being in the locker room?
Yeah, I think it's almost recognizing that from last year and trying to build out deeper lines. I think you're seeing a little. I mean, we're obviously getting the top guys contributing pretty at a pretty good pace right now with Alfano and Pano, but you're also getting goals from other guys too, like Royston. So that's what we're trying. I think the team's really trying to accomplish is just being a deeper team. If that has some aches and pains in the early part of the season, I think we're okay with that. I think we obviously want to be able to win every game, but finding the right mix as guys get trickled back in the lineup too. You saw Dylan Edwards come back in. He's had 4 really strong games, scoring some big goals like he always does. And then also you get Matthew Schaefer back in here in the future. You want to get the whole group together. But I think maybe it is a little bit of last year, just understanding it's hard to win in this league if you're not 4 lines deep. You need to have 4 lines that can roll. Even getting the experience early in the season for those third and fourth line guys and the third pairing defensemen, it's huge as the season goes on, and that's kind of one thing that you stress. You probably don't win a championship in the first few weeks, but you probably lose it. So you just want to make sure you're really putting your best foot forward and making sure guys are really getting into the mix and feeling comfortable.
I am curious because I mentioned him a second ago. I understand one of the goals he scored was an empty netter on Saturday, and we can talk all we want about the Stars, and that's a big part of it. And I think, yeah, Terrance has to be able to step up, Spence has to be able to step up, and for the most part, they have. I also think the Edwards, Femus, Alfano line, just my personal opinion, that should still be the top line. They're just continuing to dominate, and we'll get to that in a second. But Wesley Royston is a guy who really didn't get talked about a ton in training camp. I know when we had Trevor Kubea and Sean Bednard on this podcast, they had mentioned him a little bit as a potential option. But I have just been shocked at the fact that he's been on that top line. He's been as consistent as he's been with Misiak and Terrance, and he's put up 3 goals of the weekend. What is it about Wesley Royston that has allowed him to pop off the page as well as he has early in the season? Because he's a guy that, quite frankly, I didn't really expect him to be, much less in the top line, the top 6.
Yeah, he's got a knack for the net. I think he's a bigger guy. He's not afraid to get into those areas. I think you forget maybe how young he was last year. I want to say he might have been the youngest player in the league last year. So that experience he got throughout last year is huge. Coming in this year with a lot of confidence, getting a chance with a guy like Kerry Terrance and Misiak. I mean, those are top-notch guys. Those are NHL draft pick guys that you put a guy like him with those 2 players, he's going to find some scoring and some confidence, I think. And that's one thing for him. Maybe he didn't get those minutes last year, but getting it early on this year. And like I said, you see the goal he's scoring. He's right around the net. Like he's not afraid to get there in the dangerous areas. And he's a good finisher. So he's a big guy. He's got a long reach. He's able to get to those pucks that are loose, use his body to get in good position. So he's done a really good job of that early in the season.
And he's part of the top line with Kerry Terrance and Martin Misiak, who are starting to find their strides. I think Misiak's been a pleasant surprise, and even though he hasn't necessarily factored on the score sheet in the last couple of weeks, he has gotten some big assists. And I think that's been a big part as well. Gabe Vraska also had a decent weekend. He had a goal on Saturday, 2 points. I think there was so much talked about when the Otters traded for him, right? And I was a little skeptical I know he played with Malcolm Spence in his younger years, but I was concerned about how those two games would match up because they're similar styles, right? They're more of a sleuth attacker, if you will. As you know,
Yeah.
you can have that shot anywhere, anytime to be able to put the puck in the net, but you're not necessarily going to have the ability to have the crafty style to be able to drive the net. And so, surprisingly to me, they have worked out. And maybe I was a little bit underzealous for what I expected because again, teammates, you never know, former teammates. Though, what have those two been like from your vantage point on the bench? Because I view them as guys who know that they have similar skill sets, yet still somehow are able to play off of each other. Normally in hockey, opposites attract, right? That's why
Yeah.
the Edward Themis Alfano line is so darn good.
Yeah.
But these guys, even with similar skill sets, still seem to be able to play well. And I'm just curious to see why that is.
Yeah, I mean, they're a good balance for each other. I think Vraska's, I think he's more opportunistic. He's a guy that he wants to be in the area where a puck comes to him and he's able to finish it. I think that's what you saw at that big goal on Saturday night. And Malcolm can create a little bit more. I think he's a more guy that he when he's on his game, he's taking the puck to the net. He's using his speed to get wide, and he's creating for his line mates as well. And that's kind of a benefit from Vraska if he's able to kind of build off of that and feed off of what Malcolm does. And Malcolm's a great player. He's got a really high potential. He's a guy that you can really put anybody with, much like a Carey Terrance, and you can find that gel. I mean, it's early in the year. It was a few years ago they played together, but I think for what we're seeing so far, it's a really good sign. And Gabe obviously came. He missed a couple of games as well, so he got back in lineup on Saturday and looked pretty good. So yeah, I mean that's important. I mean, you need that balance. You need those guys to kind of feed off of each other. But I think it's really just the fact that Gabe can read Malcolm pretty well, and Malcolm's a guy that's not afraid to. He wants the puck all the time. He's not afraid to go in those areas and beat guys wide and create for his line mates.
With all due respect to maybe some of the guys that Mississauga has, some of the guys you saw with the Windsor Spitfires, and I understand that both those teams made some big trades in the offseason, I would make an argument that in terms of consistency's sake, the Edwards Themis Alfano line might be the most complete line in the league through the first 6 games of the season. I mean, we talked at length, Ryan, in the playoffs last year about how these guys, a motley crew that got put together essentially on a needs base, right? Dylan Edwards had a decent end of the season. He's not a big guy, but he's going to score goals. Pano Themis, who's, of course, that natural leader, even without the C on his chest, he's got that sniper ability. And then Sam Alfano just wrecks everybody. It almost reminds me of the HBK line in Pittsburgh. Yeah. And when we talked about it, okay, we know the Penguins have to have it and the Sabres have to have something like that, right? You have to have a great third, fourth line that has a mix of talent to win the cup. I think it's the same with these guys. And even though you're not necessarily going to see all of them put up goals, Themis certainly can, Dylan Edwards can in spurts, I think this line complements each other so well because of their different skill sets and their different talents. And when you have a guy like Sam Alfano who can crash the net, Dylan Edwards who can get into the zone and be crafty, and then the sniper and Themis, I don't know if I were Sam Butler, and it's certainly not going to happen now, I would never break up this line because I think in terms of consistency and how they complement each other, they're probably one of the, if not the best line in the OHL.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue that they're not right now. I mean, they've been doing it for 2 years now. I think they picked up right where they left off last year. Every time they're on the ice, the other team's aware. They're so dangerous. They all complement each other really well. Like you kind of pointed out, they each have their own strengths, and that just really feeds off each other really well. I mean, Sam's a guy that's going to go in the corner. He's a big guy. He wins those little battles. He gets the puck to his craftier players in Dylan and Pano, and they're just both guys that are able to score goals. I mean, I think Pano hasn't scored. I think he's got 10 points this year, but not a goal scoring start that he probably wanted, but they're going to start coming. I mean, they're getting so many chances every night. He's going to start scoring some big goals. But yeah, it's just a line that when you look around the league, tough to say any line's better than them right now. And it's not a flash in the pan. I think last year you see it, maybe they did it for a couple months. It's becoming more of a consistent thing now, and they're a line that's going to be together for hopefully the season if things go well. And those are the guys that are going to be really relied on as the year goes on. And it's tough when you're another opposing team, when you can roll out 3 lines. You obviously have that line that's a top line, but you can roll out 2 lines behind them that are also just as dangerous. It's going to pay off throughout the year, and we're going to be a team that's really tough to deal with as the year goes on.
And look, with all due respect to the Terrance and Spence line, who I think those two are more talented than anybody on the line that we just mentioned, I think that's the top line for Erie, and it has to be moving forward. I just think the way that they're able to play with each other, and I think also to the longevity. I mean, in the OHL, as you know, Ryan, whether it's with the Otters or any team that's really good and has talent down the lineup, you don't typically get the same lines for a month at a
Yep.
time. And dating back to last playoffs, Stan Butler's had these guys together for 3 months of playing time. And
Yeah.
so I think that is going to serve them really well moving forward because, barring any trades that you make, and I don't think they're going to trade any one of those three away because you're certainly not going to sell if you keep playing the way your offense is playing, you're going to buy. This is the line that's going to have to continue to get it done. And the big question is going to be if you're Stan Butler is now, who do you start relying on? And you're starting to see that materialize a little bit. How about Noah Erliden?
Yeah.
Your guy back there in net, Ryan, he plays 2 games, 75 saves. Seems like he was comfortable again. How's he progressing, and what are you seeing from him through the first few starts that maybe you like, and some things that you think you see out there observing-wise?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's not much to dislike with Noah right now. He's getting better every game. I think he's more comfortable with the style of hockey over here. It's one thing we kind of talk about. When you're in Europe, the ice is bigger. So when mistakes happen, a lot of them aren't going to be as dangerous. Like if there's a mistake in the OHL, you're pretty much in a prime scoring chance, like in your zone. Like it's always going to be a prime scoring chance. So he's getting better at that, like being able to follow plays out of the zone and recognize when it breaks down, making sure he's already ready for that. And that's one thing he's gotten a lot better at. And just the flow of the game in the year. I mean, you play a lot more games over here than he did than he was used to. In juniors in Sweden. So that's something that he's going to have to really get more comfortable with. But it's about getting in a rhythm. I like the schedule early on too. Like he's played a lot so far. We have 6 games in 10 days coming up where he's going to play a lot there too. So it's a busy start for him, but he's going to learn right away. Like he's going to get into the groove. I think the guys are more comfortable with him back there. I think he's more comfortable with the guys in front of him. Like being predictable and understanding where the danger happens is something that you get more comfortable the more you play. So no, I'm really pleased with Noah. He's a great kid. He's got a great attitude, and he's really hungry to learn and get better. And I think I don't know that we could have had asked for a better start from him coming over from Swedish hockey over to the OHL. He's adjusted really well early on, so that's a really good sign. And I think it's only going to get better for him as the year goes on.
Man, it's so curious that you mentioned the 6 games in 10 days because I wanted to finish with that. I mean, the schedule didn't do you any favors to begin with.
Yeah.
And for those who haven't been following the Otters, they have had to play teams with the like of Mississauga, Kitchener, London, Saginaw, Windsor, North Bay. I mean, you could argue those are the 6 teams in the league that are ahead of Erie in terms of the power rankings. I think the OHL power rankings would adhere to that based on what came out just a little while ago. 6 games in 10 days. Otters fans get a home game on Thursday. It's a rare weeknight home game against the Kingston Frontenacs, then 2 road games back in London Sunday and Flint again on Saturday. As a former player, as an Olympian, I mean, you gotta sometimes strap on the bootstraps and say, look, we just gotta skate away and do what we can. But is it? I know the OHL has to have a certain schedule because of school for certain kids and, just the travel component for the American teams. But is 6 games in 10 days, even for these young of kids, unreasonable? I mean, how do you even begin to structure and layer your practices and your warm-ups and your game schedule, knowing that you just have this sort of stretch where you're playing literally every day?
Yeah, no, I mean it's not unreasonable. I think it's something you get used to, especially as you to become a pro. These guys are going to be professionals, a lot of them someday. That's a normal schedule when you're playing pro hockey. Like you're playing every other day. You might be playing some back-to-backs. It becomes more of just go and play a game kind of thing, and practices might not be as long. You might not practice as much. You might get some more days off in between there. So just going and playing games, and that's the fun part of hockey. So these guys are, they're excited for it. They like the challenge of that early on. It's going to show us early on, I think, where we really stack up overall. Even as we're getting guys back in the lineup, like if we can have a really good stretch here of 6 games, put ourselves in a good spot, I think it's a lot to kind of be proud of and to build off of as the season goes on. But yeah, I mean, I think you get used to the grind early on, and you just get excited to play the games and making sure in practice also. When we do practice, that you're really taking care of yourself, taking care of your body too. It'll be a eye opener, I think, for these guys, and you play that many games early on. How important it is to make sure you're resting and rehabbing and preparing for the games.
And again, a roller coaster of a season so far for the Erie Otters and a a 3-2-1 start in what has been just an up and down year so far for them. And a big set of games this weekend on Thursday, of course, at home, and then Saturday and Sunday back on the road, Flint and London. They love to put the Otters in the Knights early on in the season. It's almost like they put them on 3 or 4 times to start the year, and then there's nothing for about 3 months, and then it's 3 or 4 times to end the year.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they just hope that maybe come playoff time, they face each other again. That's another story for another day. Continuing along here on our Hockey Talk Tuesday podcast, Isaac Pekyash, Ryan Zapolsky. Glad you're with us. If you're watching, whether it's on X, hello, Facebook, good to see you, as well as our YouTube page. Glad you're joining us there. Make sure to like, subscribe to this podcast network and our podcast channel. We have episodes Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. So unless the only day that you watch social media is Wednesday, well, you're in luck. So that's a good thing. And we're happy to be bringing you this podcast week to week with Ryan on one of the only times that he has free of the entire week, because it's a busy time when we get into October. Hey, what's up with the Pens? Do we know who they are right now?
I don't even know if they know yet. I don't think they figured it out yet. It's up and down.
I don't know either, man. Let's talk Pittsburgh, and we'll get to Buffalo. It's funny because they play tomorrow, but go ahead.
Yeah, I would say it's almost kind of like last year. Like, we can't figure out what they're doing early on. One night they look like the best team in the league. For a period, they look like the worst team in the league. It's interesting to see how things are going so far. Yeah. But I mean, the good thing is they're scoring goals. I mean, that's good. They're getting some goals from guys like Lars Eller and some more third line, fourth line guys. So that's good. That's a positive thing early on. And Malkin's had a great start too. I mean, I think he did last year as well. But having him, jump out of the gates that well, that's a positive thing to see. But yeah, it's I don't know which direction they're going. I mean, 2-2, they really haven't showed us much either way so far.
I agree. And I think, when you look at the start of their schedule, and, I watched the opening night 6-0 loss to the Rangers. And I mean, you talk about the air being let out of the balloon. It felt like it was a season ending loss that knocked you out of the playoffs. But, it's something about, I think for the first time probably in 2 years, this Penguin team, whether they have it or not, just from my point of view, they believe they have depth. Yeah. And I don't know if you could say that in the last 3 or 4 years. Maybe you believed it, right? Whether you brought in Noel Chari, Lars Eller a couple years back, you bring in, names or other names are escaping me, but there's plenty of players that you tried to bring in as borderline third, fourth line guys. You said, okay, this is huge. But I don't know if they necessarily really believe that they have it. And I think now you're starting to see this. Lars Eller's had a good start to the season. Kevin Hayes has picked up 2 goals in the first 4 games for Pittsburgh. Ricard Raquel's got 2 goals. Yeah. And those are all guys who last season, I know Hayes didn't play with the team, but all guys who either really struggled or just played to the level of what line they were on. And I think what you're seeing from this Pittsburgh team is a bit of a bounce in scoring. There are 10-plus players that have 2 or more total points in the season. And I think that's huge for the Pens. Now, I am concerned, and we'll get into the goaltending situation in a second, but I just think at the end of the day, when Pittsburgh won the Cup in 2016 and 2017, to me there were many keys, but the one key for me that they were able to do is because Sidney Crosby was so good, they put young talent on his wings. How many times have we talked about this on this podcast, right? Whether it was Gensel, whether it was Connor Sheary, Tom Kunak, I mean, you name the guys. They were able to put young guys on Sid's wings, and that allowed them to lengthen the lineup. You could put Phil Kessel on the third line. You could move Nick Bonito to third line center. You could move Brian Rust down to the second line with Evgeny Malkin, and it allowed for different combinations of lines where at that point, you got to the fourth line and you had Matt Cullen in the works that were still scoring goals. I think that's what Pittsburgh has to do. And to me, I look at a guy like, a Rutger McGroarty, who's really struggling to start the season. Yeah. Do you feel confident enough now, Ryan, and at least I would, that you say, okay, our scoring is enough early on in the season where we can put some of these young guys on Sid's wings. He's going to help them grow, help them develop, and still be productive, and we can lengthen our lineup a little bit, because I think that's a huge key.
Yeah. Yeah, I would do it. I mean, I think, like you said, you put Beauvillier on his first line. He scored a couple goals. I don't know if Raquel's scoring on his wing, but whatever the combinations are, you got to try to mix it up. I think that's one thing that it's become kind of stale in the past couple of years is his line's too easy to shut down, and then that just the rest of the lineup just doesn't produce enough. So I think when you can have him producing up there, with different guys. When you can put Urkel on the third line, maybe you could put Bavelia or even Russ down on that third line. Whatever you have to do, they have to do it. I mean, they have to find third line scoring. They have to find fourth line scoring. And yeah, they've gotten it so far. So that's a really positive thing to see. Because yeah, you can't like any league, you can't compete with the top teams if you're relying on two lines to score. Like it's just not possible. Unless you're the Edmonton Oilers. I think you got away with it a little bit last year. You really got heavy first line scoring. But I think you saw this year too. They struggled out of the gate because of that. Like you have to have guys that can score throughout the lineup. And Pittsburgh's, I think again, they might be willing to kind of test it a little bit early on in the year, see what works. Take a couple losses maybe that you wouldn't really want to have, but you're willing to kind of test the waters and see what kind of fits, what kind of lineup. And even like a guy like Jesse Puljujärvi, like you can put him up there right now too, and he's got a couple points early on. So yeah, I think that's an exciting thing for them to see that so far this year. Because I mean, they're a team that probably has the most amount of pressure, especially when you look at their coach Sullivan. He's got the most amount of pressure on himself to kind of to be good early on in the year. Like you can't have a bad start if you're him and expect to kind of keep your job. So the fact that he's willing to do that shows a lot of confidence he has in this team, and it's exciting to see so far for them. With not the greatest results, a little test sample size, but I think overall something they can be kind of build off of and hopefully get this whole group kind of on the same page.
Does Geno Malkin feel like he has a target on his back? Because it seems like he's playing with that target, right? I mean,
yeah,
I saw it started in 09, right?
Right.
And it seems like it's back.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's heard whispers of breaking them up and he being maybe a guy that's gone. I think he takes that personally. Like he's a guy that's what is he overall? Like probably top 5 current scoring in the NHL or like in the history of the NHL. What he's done throughout of his career, and I think he's a little underappreciated for what he's done as well. He does take that personally. I think he has so far this year. I mean, their guys are getting older. I think what is Malkin, 37 years old? Like these guys, they're older player. Like for the NHL, like that's an old player. And he's producing at a high rate. I think he does take it personally. He's a guy that can really turn it on though. Like if he gets that kind of attitude a little bit behind him, and he's really like got that chip on his shoulder, he's a guy that can be still a really, really successful and high producing player in the NHL. So that's great to see so far. And hopefully he's a guy that can keep it up throughout the year.
Other thing too I really like is, and I just mentioned this as you were talking, 1 goal and 6 assists. And I think for Malkin, as much as he's a scorer, I think if he can be a guy who can dish the puck, then maybe you trust him to be similar to Sid, and that lengthens out your lineup even more. I mean, if Geno Malkin is able to dish out points after points after points like Sid can, then you really start to get into the, okay, we feel like we can roll 4 lines column. And I think that's something that Pittsburgh has had in years past when they've won the Cup, but they have not had really since they won the Cup back in 2017. And so, for the Penguins, 2-2 is not a tremendous start, but keep in mind the schedule they have as well. It's probably one of the more brutal schedules in hockey. You get Buffalo at home tomorrow. You get Carolina at home Friday. Then you've got your West Coast Canadian trip, Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver. You may end up 0-4 in those 4 games. And so if you're Pittsburgh, even if you start the year 4-6, you're still looking and you're saying, it's okay. I mean, again, they are not a great team yet, and I don't know if they're going to be a great team. But the signs are there. Those are the positives for me. The negative is this. I think you're going to laugh when I put up this graphic.
I don't know.
I think we have to have a conversation.
I don't.
Joel Bloomquist got the start in game number 3 against Toronto. I know Jari was in net when they beat Montreal, but Tristan, if nothing else, his best performances in his career have been early in the season.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, if he is this bad now, I don't know if he's going to get better. And I'm not saying Joel Bloomquist is a large sample size, but do you have to tickle that itch if you're Pittsburgh? Because I think it might be worth seeing what the young guy has.
Well, I think they kind of sent a little message to Jarry early. They gave Bloomquist the back-to-back starts. That's a message to me, to Tristan Jarry, that he's got to be better. Like he's their highest paid goalie. He's the guy they rely on to be their starter. And he stunk in the first game. Like that first game against Toronto was bad. He was okay against Montreal. I mean, he gave 3 goals. He was better. They got the win. That's the most important thing. But like he's a guy that has to turn it on right now. Like I don't know I think he's starting against Buffalo tomorrow. That's a big game for him. Like he has to find a way to kind of get some rhythm early on. He's a guy that plays off of rhythm. He tries to find good consistency early on in the year and build off that. But if you're not able to give him starts back to back very often at the start of the year, then he's gonna have a tough year, and it's gonna be a problem. I think when the Nedeljkovic comes back, like what do you do with Tristan Jarry? You can't roll 3 goalies. So who's the odd man out at that point? But it's tough to say. I mean, Bloomquist was good in his first start. I was impressed with him. I think struggled a little bit in his next one. But I think going forward, he's got to be the guy he has to find. One of them has to find rhythm in whatever that mix is going to be. That's kind of the secret recipe that Sullivan's got to find it. They got to find it as a group out there.
And again, I think as we talk all about the potential that the Pittsburgh offense has, if your goaltending's not there, and you know this, Ryan, I mean, it was Sergei Bobrovsky last year. Stuart Skinner was tremendous for the Oilers. I mean, how many times did Andrei Vasilevsky bail out Tampa Bay? And it felt like every time the Lightning were in an elimination game, they only had to score 1 goal because Andrei was going to get a shutout. The goaltending just has to be better overall. I do think for Pittsburgh, and I know it's a different management group, and I know it is it's not a different head coach, but maybe it's it's a different mindset for the head coach. Mike Sullivan, back in those playoff runs when they won the Cup, was not afraid to switch goaltenders, right? Back then it was Marc-Andre Fleury and Matt Murray. He was brought up from Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, and knows the importance of young talent. So it would not surprise me as, let's say, Jory loses tomorrow against Buffalo. Maybe they throw him in on Friday. I wouldn't be shocked if Joe Bloomquist gets the nod for the entire West Coast Canadian swing, because I think that that's something Mike Sullivan has been prone to do. He's not afraid to do it. And I think he also understands that you got to light a fire under the goaltender somehow. And if Tristan Jarry is not performing this early in the season, it doesn't get easier. And if you're Pittsburgh, the last thing you can do with the age of your lineup is get behind the 8 ball and struggle and have to play catch up in the standings. So I think that that's something that Pittsburgh has to look at. That'll be a really good conversation for us in our pod moving forward. Because right now, to me, Joel Bloomquist is the guy. If Jarry can get it back, then that's one thing. And then you factor in Alex Nedeljkovic, I think you have to be able to play him too. So Pittsburgh's going to have a 3-goalie problem potentially. Yeah. And to me, Jarry's the odd man out because he's been the one that's performed the worst. I know Bloomquist the small sample size, but Jarry has been the worst performer out of the 3.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, I think it seems like Sullivan's going with a if you win, you stay in kind of mentality early on. So we'll see how Buffalo goes. But like you said, I think that Western Canada swing is to be huge for the team as a whole. I mean, you play four teams that look pretty good early on too. Well, I guess Edmonton's struggling, but the other 3 look pretty good. Edmonton, we know what Edmonton can do. They're just maybe having a little hangover from the Cup, but they're going to be there too. So that'll be a huge swing for them. And whoever ends up in the net throughout those 4 games is going to be a pretty telling sign, I think, from Mike Sullivan and his strategy moving forward.
Let's flip the script and talk about the team that they're playing tomorrow night at PPG Paints Arena. That's the Buffalo Sabres as we roll along here at our Hockey Talk Tuesday podcast. Isaac Beckyash, Ryan Zapolsky. We're on Facebook, we're on X, we're on Twitch, we're on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Like, subscribe. We're talking pucks. So you know if you're listening, you're watching, you love what we love too. And kudos, by the way, to Ryan for wearing the Team USA gear. I got to get myself one of those, even though it's probably more customizable than what I could get. Where's Buffalo's offense? It's not here. Kudos to them for putting up 5 against the Panthers in what was their first win of the season over the weekend. But in the first 4 games, Buffalo sits at 1-3. They have scored 1 goal in each of their first 3 games, and then that 5-goal breakout against the Panthers. But we talk about the Penguins and that some of the issues that have persisted in previous seasons with goaltending and whatnot could be a problem early in the season. And for Buffalo, it's the same. I mean, if you take out Alex Tuch, there's 2 players on this team that have scored 2 goals or more in this season. And I think that for the Sabres, if you're Lindy Ruff, you have to be banging your head against the wall and say, I came from New Jersey where we could score and our goaltending was pathetic. Now our goaltending's slightly better, but we can't score. What is the problem with Buffalo's offense, Ryan?
Yeah. Well, first off, their power play is 0 for 14, so that doesn't help. They're getting zero momentum off of that. But ultimately, it's just their best players are not playing well. Like Dylan Cousins has 0 points. Outside, I mean, Thompson's got a couple goals, but you need those guys to be your best players. And it's a funny thing to say, like your best players have to be your best players. But in the NHL, that's so true. In the salary cap era, you pay those top guys so much. You rely so heavily on those guys to be producers, and if they're not, then it's a problem for the whole team. But whatever they need to do, they need to try new combinations. They need to maybe bring in a guy. I don't even know if there's a guy available right now to kind of bring in to spark that lineup. But something has to change there because I mean it's early. I mean you don't want to hit the panic button too early because you know those guys will eventually get there. But it's a concern I think early on because that's what you're hoping to rely on. Like when they were really good 2 years ago, that team was scoring at will. They played some tough teams early on where they haven't been able to not just score but just really produce a lot and like produce a lot of chances. And a lot of it does flake the team. The whole lineup kind of sags back and they can't really get anything going. That really feels like what it is for them. When you start 0-14 on the power play, coming off of a poor power play year last year as well, you probably doubt yourself a little bit too. You know something's not working anymore. So something has to kind of ignite something with those top guys, and they really got to take over. But right now, it's been a struggle for them for sure.
I don't want to harp too much on Tage Thompson. He does have 2 goals through 4 games, and so if you're doing the tabulation, he's on pace for 41. But I do think the offense starts with him, and when it fails, he is a part of it. Is it a coaching style with Lindy Ruff, and before that, other guys who have been part of the Sabres coaching regime, Don Granato before he left? Why is Tage Thompson in your mind not necessarily the same? To me, he doesn't look like the same player on the ice. I get the 2 goals. I get that he's maybe a slow starter. I don't even know if he's figured himself out yet. And, for me, it's like the NFL, right? When players get film on you, you can have great years, you can have a great 2-year stretch, and then people start to figure you out and you have to adjust. I just don't know if he's adjusted enough. Is it a style thing? What do you think it is with Tage Thompson that might be the reason that he's not necessarily performing the way that he should or expects to be out of the game?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to make assumptions off of like what the culture is like there, like what I know the complaint last year was that they just didn't have like the best coaching, I guess, culture because the guys just didn't feel like motivated in practice. And that's an important part for these younger players. Like that's where you can regress pretty quickly if you're going into practice and not taking it seriously. And it seems like not just him, like Dylan Cousins too. Like how much has he regressed in the last couple of years? He has a 31 goal year, and then he just hasn't done much since then. But yeah, he's a guy that needs to really get some motivation. Whether maybe he has some injury issues that's kind of hampering him a little bit. But he's a player that relies so much on his shot to score goals. Like he's got an elite shot. He's just not putting himself in those positions. So he's not getting to those areas that he when he was scoring goals, he would find those soft areas. He just can't get there right now for whatever reason. I don't know that it's necessarily a coaching thing. I felt like it was that way last year. Kind of hard to say it this year. I mean, it's early on, so maybe it just hasn't kicked in yet. Like whatever the new strategy Lindy's trying to kind of throw into them. Hasn't fully clicked yet for those guys, and that could be a thing. So we can't really, again, we don't want to say early on like it's a lost cause with what Lindy's trying to do. He's been a coach that I think when he saw those Sabres teams in the late 90s that were successful, they were a more conservative team. I think a little bit. They weren't a team that was going to try to go outscore you every game. They relied a lot on their goaltending those years with Dominic Hasek and Ryan Miller years to kind of bail them out from their mistakes and being willing to take those risks. And maybe that's one thing they haven't really done this year is just willing to take the risk to get chances because they're just not, again, they're not creating enough. So you're not going to score a lot of goals in this league. These goalies are too good if you're not creating yourself enough chances. So I think you look for that going on. Maybe they're more willing to jump out of the zone, try to create more odd man rushes. But for whatever reason, hasn't really kicked in yet this year.
I know it's early in the year, and we talk a lot about this in hypotheticals because we're 4 games in, and so there's plenty of season left. But the small sample size that we've seen, and you brought it up, 0-14 with the Buffalo power play, it seems to be worse than it was last year, and last year it was not great. I mean, outside of Pittsburgh, it was one of the worst in the league. Why? I mean, I'm sure you've gotten to see some film and some tape on it. What is it with Buffalo's power play that's not allowing them to score? Because they've got the talent again to be able to do it.
They do. There's just no movement. I think that's what we saw last year too. Like they were just standing still, hoping the puck would come to them. Maybe relying too much on Rasmus Dahlin to kind of create those chances from the quarterback spot. But for whatever reason, they're not there's no movement in that power play. If you watch it, it's really kind of standstill. Like they're hoping that they can make that pass across to Tate Thompson. He gets his one-timer off, they score a goal. And a lot of that comes from work too. Like you have to outwork them. You have one more player than them, so the other team obviously realizes that, and they're going to work a little bit harder than you are to try to kind of even that out. But you have to match that, and they haven't been able to do it so far. It's almost a thing like with Pittsburgh, when Pittsburgh was, those power plays were so good last year, they stalled out because it became the same thing. They weren't really mixing it up. Buffalo hasn't tried to change it. Like they've tried the same exact strategy for the last 2 years now. Teams caught on. Teams realize how to kill that. And when you're not willing to outwork the other team and they understand what your strategy is, it's going to be really hard to score. Like you're not going to create these great chances that you should be creating when you have the man advantage.
It's cool to get to see Pittsburgh and Buffalo play so early in the season. Yeah. I think it just coincides well with what we're talking about. Two teams that are trying to find their way, again, albeit early. This may seem like a funny question to ask because, once again, we caveat we're 4 games in. But if you had to put a marker on which team it is more important for to win this game, just based on the schedule, based on what they've looked like, who do you think is it more important for to come out with 2 points in this game tomorrow, Ryan? Penguins or Sabres?
I think it's gonna be Buffalo. Just going, like, the mentality of going 1-4 versus 2-3 is huge. I think that's why it's more important for them, especially this young group. Like they don't want to start losing games and getting comfortable doing it. I think Pittsburgh's more of a veteran group. Like they can handle a loss at home. Being 2-3, I mean, even understanding the tough road trip coming up for them. I think overall it's going to be more critical for Buffalo to win than Pittsburgh early on.
Tell you what, it's hard when we're talking about key games early in the season. I know they're all big, but once again, you have 2 teams that have the issues that are showing up, and it's in different perspective. We didn't even get to the Devin Levi UPL argument, who's also struggling. UPL is early in the season, but once again, it's early. There's still plenty of time, as we know for the Otters and as we know for the Sabres and the Penguins. And we're just scratching the surface when it comes to the season and what it comes to this podcast as well. Make sure to let us know how you like tonight's episode. Leave a review, like, comment, subscribe, all those good things. And Ryan, let's do this again next week. I think people are taken to this, and Tuesday nights are always fun. We like alliteration with Hockey Talk Tuesdays, and I also think it's a good way to recap the week. It's about the only night the Otters aren't doing anything. So
yeah, we got a lot of games in the next 6 days too. Both all 3 teams, so it'll be a lot to talk about next week.
A lot to talk about indeed. So we're back next week, 8:30. Make sure to join us. By the way, we've got a lot of other great things in the pipeline too on the Gem City Sports Podcast Network. We've got a new location we're going to be trying out for Thursday night's episode. So join us at 8 o'clock on Thursday night for our episode. I'll have Nick Artman as well as Jonathan Williams and Wayne Bradford, who are joining me for that episode. And then Ryan's back next Tuesday. So we will see you then. Enjoy your week of hockey. Next podcast is coming up on Thursday. Take care.